So I'm going to talk to you today about network serendipity and the flow of ideas. My name is Emily Webber. I'm an independent Agile and delivery consultant. I work mainly with organisations that are going through some kind of change and want to be better in some kind of way. My focus tends to be around people, how people connect with each other, and creating the right kind of environment and culture for people and teams to be successful. So I'm going to start today with a story about Nadia. This is Nadia. She's a product manager, and it's Monday morning. She's just got into the office, and she does what many of us do when we first get into the office, and she goes to the kitchen to get a coffee. There she meets Brian and a new colleague called Emma who's just started today. They have a chat about the weekend and start to connect over a shared love of films. On her way back to her desk, she bumps into Amit. Amit used to be on her team. He's a BA. She asks him how things are going, and he mentions that his team are working on a new payment system. Now, this is something that's in Nadia's product roadmap, so she's pretty interested in this, and she arranges a learning session between their two teams in the next couple of days. During her lunch break, she meets up with some fellow product managers to catch up and have a natter. After the social pleasantries, conversation turns to the new product strategy, something they're all really keenly interested in as it affects them all. And they agree that they should get together and make time to write a shared response to it so that they can have input into it as well. Towards the end of the day, she goes to a meeting, and while she's waiting for the meeting before them to wrap up, she has a chat in the hallway with Colin from the marketing department. And she learns they're planning a big marketing campaign. She mentions the product she's working on, and they talk about potential fit for the campaign. So Colin forwards her an email then and there so they can follow up later. This is fairly normal in our day-to-day as we go around our office, bumping into people. Here Nadia's met a new colleague, found out about a potential learning opportunity for her team that also might be a dependency, initiated some action with some fellow product managers, and found an opportunity for collaboration with a different department. All in all, a good day. And this is what we call serendipity, so the unexpected and fortuitous outcomes that come from chance encounters. So not things that are planned, just when you find things out by chance and it leads to something wonderful. And it's an essential part of working life. These moments might come from conversations in hallways, over coffee, or quick catch-up whilst waiting for a meeting to get started. Maybe unexpected knowledge that's gained from overheard snippets in open offices, or reading what's on team walls, maybe watching an internal presentation. Things like making new connections, joining up work and concepts, sparking ideas, solving challenging problems, or creating new innovations through the collision of perspectives. It really drives our organisation. And we're also wired to connect with each other. So as human beings, we're born without the ability to look after ourselves. So the first thing that we need to do is connect with other people that can look after us. And this need to connect to others stays with us our whole life, which is why, this woman looks so sad in the office on her own. If you're not connected, it can feel this isolated and lonely as well. So we know we get value from talking to other people. We know we're wired to connect to each other. But somehow our organisations often create the environment where we can't. We create silos through competing budgets, competing priorities, people going for the same job opportunities. And you've got silos in your organisations when you hear things like this. So people stop thinking about people as individuals. It's the antithesis of empathy. They start thinking about people as homogenous groups. So you may have heard people say, finance haven't paid for this thing, or procurement take ages to do anything, or that team over there are just not very good. This isn't thinking about people as people. It isn't talking to those individuals. It's this siloed language which doesn't help ideas flow. It doesn't help us when we're working together. Now this person here, this is Alex or Sandy Pentland, professor at MIT, and he's done a lot of research into organisations to see how they communicate with each other. Essentially has found out where organisations where ideas do flow through communication are better than organisations where it doesn't. So he says the propagation of ideas from person to person is the source of collective intelligence that we call culture. It really is about the idea flow. More communication means greater social intelligence, which leads to greater productivity and greater creative outputs. Getting outside of our bubble, talking to other people with different experience, all really helps with this. So he's done things like this. He has spent a lot of time analysing the flow of information and communication in organisations. So who emails who, people that he's worked with have worn kind of electric lanyards that can find out who's talking to each other for how long and where that happens, and even understand something about body language. And then he says face-to-face communication is the most important. So in this particular scenario here, which is a German bank, I believe, the yellow box on the right-hand side is customer service. And what you can see here is that customer service was so out of the loop because they weren't having a lot of face-to-face communication with other people, which made it really hard for them to do their job, which means unhappy customers, which means that's bad for the organisation. So this wasn't particularly good. And what they did in this scenario is change the seating plan so that customer service were in the middle of it and could hear what was going on, which really improved how they could do their job. And this doesn't just happen across departments, it happens in departments and functions as well. And this is a social graph that I created when I was working with a client, looking at people that work within the same function. Now, here, this looks at how information flows between people, who asks each other for help, and that some of the bigger circles, the bigger nodes, are people that are really kind of crucial and instrumental in that network. And what this means, what this shows, is there are some people that don't really talk to other people, and there are some people that only ever talk to the same people. And this creates silos of knowledge, silos of information, expertise, learning, support work, and decision making. And there are some times where organisations even encourage this behaviour and pit some of those teams against each other. Now, Alex Pentland also says, or has shown, is that having a coffee break together could save $15 million a year. So he was working with a call centre that weren't doing that well, and drawing on his insight, he suggested that instead of the employees having staggered coffee breaks, which they were having, that maybe they should have coffee breaks together. And the manager was so kind of baffled and desperate at this time that he tried it out. And what happened is just the act of people going for coffee together meant that the average call handling time fell by more than 20% among lower performing teams and decreased by 8% overall at the call centre. So predicting how much money that saved, it turned out to be $15 million a year. So it really kind of flies in the face of what you think might happen with, if people at their desks are working harder, or if someone's always covering the phone, there's going to be better utilisation. But actually that time people spend having coffee together, socialising, exchanging ideas, letting ideas flow, saved huge amounts of money, and also meant employee satisfaction went up 10% across the organisation. So how do we foster networked organisations? One really important thing is we're moving away, we're not talking about hierarchy with less safe environments. What we want to do is support people to talk to each other at all levels and show this behaviour from the top, that actually everyone should be and can be connected to each other. This tweet came out just the other day from one of my favourite organisations to look at, which is Timpsons, which is those cobblers on the high street that have been around for ages. And the CEO of Timpsons, James Timpsons, said this just the other day. This is how their company hierarchy works. No one is more important than anyone else. A real kind of idea of a networked organisation. Counter to that, this is a fantastic talk to watch by Margaret Heffernan called "Forget the Pecking Order at Work." Now, Margaret Heffernan is an entrepreneur, CEO, writer, and keynote speaker, and she talks about an experiment that was done by evolutionary biologists looking at chickens and seeing if they could make the best team of chickens, super chickens. What they found is when they tried to take the best team, they ended up kind of stepping all over each other and in order to be more productive. And it speaks to how we might reward people. So if we reward people to be the best, the super chicken model she talks about, are we rewarding people to work in an individualistic way, not share their ideas, and not create these networked organisations? So she said social cohesion, built every coffee break, every time someone asks someone else for help, it leads to great things over time. So we need to reward the right things. We need to have the right setup in the first place for people to feel safe to talk to each other. we also want to assist serendipity to happen. So if we remove some of the barriers, we also want to create additional opportunities for this to happen. And forward-thinking organisations find ways to help serendipity happen all the time. Now, Steve Jobs, famously designed building layouts to make people move around and bump into each other. And he said, if you don't do that with your buildings, you lose serendipity and you lose a lot of innovation. Too often I hear of organisations that are doing desk moves that end up moving teams closer to each other because they work together more, reducing the amount of time people walk around the building, when sometimes it might make sense to spread people out and make them walk past each other and see each other. As Steve Jobs said, creativity is just connecting things, taking ideas from lots of places, which is very hard to do if you're only, working in a small bubble of people. Now, organisations also make work visible. Most of us that work in offices have things on the walls. You can see what people are up to. That ambient awareness of what's going on, that point where you can stop and point at something and ask someone what that means, is a really fantastic way for ideas to flow. This idea from Etsy is brilliant, which is hacking the HR system to build networks. So they built apps on top of the staff directory, and this was gamifying people to learn who each other were, so it made it easier for them to talk together later on. And Agile teams do show and tells, which is a really fantastic way, regularly sharing with other teams and other people what they're doing, what's going on, having ambient awareness of what's going on, plus the story of what people are learning, so people can hook in and say, okay, that's interesting, and join up later on. Actually, show and tells was really fundamental to how the Post-it note was created. So the Post-it note was created, a serendipitous moment. There was Dr. Spencer Silver at 3M was working on creating a really strong adhesive, and instead he discovered microspheres, which were not strong, but they retain their stickiness with a removability characteristic. And he struggled to find a use for these microspheres for years, but he kept telling his colleagues about them. Meanwhile, Arthur Fry, another 3M scientist, was frustrated because every time he went to hymn practice, he'd open his hymn book and the pieces of paper that he'd used to mark his place would fall out. And he had been to a seminar given by Dr. Silver, and he had a eureka moment where suddenly something that he needed, that he'd heard about in a seminar, kind of added up, and they got together and they ended up creating the Post-it note as we know it. So that kind of ambient awareness, the serendipitous moment, gave us something that we all use every day. But hold on, wait a minute. So I've been talking about these wonderful things that happen in offices, but we can't even spend time in the same room anymore. Our life is a little bit more like this. There is no serendipity, only Zoom. So I'm going to rejig this all a little bit and focus on how we can encourage serendipity whilst we're working in a distributed way. There are much fewer opportunities for serendipity to happen right now. Video meetings, I find this really surprising. Video meetings, everyone turns up exactly on time. We don't have that space around to socialise and ask how people are doing. We can't have lunch together. We don't have breaks together. We lose the liminal spaces that exist between meetings and around our work to engage and network with other people. But it's so important. Serendipity is so important right now. We need to create opportunities for these serendipitous moments. It's an exercise in increasing humanness at a time when people feel more isolated from each other than ever before. So we can't move around buildings. We can't see what's on people's walls. It's important that we build we make the extra work in order to help those moments happen. We build practices now that continue into the new world, whatever that world will look like. So I'm going to give you four approaches that you can use right now, which is random coffee, virtual fika, working in the open, and communities practice. And I'll run through those quickly now. So the first, which is one of my favourite and something that's very easy to set up, is random coffee. So this is where people are randomly paired with someone else to have a coffee, an agendaless meeting, just paired to have a coffee and have a chat. And there's some great examples of this happening out there. This one, Innovate Brew, is from the University of Michigan, where people from across different faculty get together. And there's a video on their website which is great, and they talks about giving permission to talk to strangers, like this idea that we can't normally just go up and talk to people, but when you put them together for a random coffee, they have a chance to talk to each other, which they wouldn't do otherwise. Sometimes it leads to something and sometimes it doesn't. It's led to amazing projects. Sometimes it's just about new ideas and seeding your mind with new things or opening up your world. They all talk about as a great investment. Taking cue from that, Hootsuite did something very similar, Random Coffee. They have a blog post called How 2,000 Random Coffees Changed My Company Culture. And it really helped people gain insights into the workings of other departments, which really helps grow empathy. They realised that they faced common issues, brought new perspectives to problems, ideas for future collaborations and projects happened, and they said it assisted serendipity in action. Now we can do this remotely fairly easily as well. This is a community that I run called Agile in the Ether, and we have a random coffee channel on our Slack group. We use an app called Donut, which pairs people up. So every 2 weeks, you're paired with a new person. You don't have an agenda. You get together. We take these random coffee selfies and share them with each other. People talk about lots of different things, anything from work issues to moving house, and of course, lots of talk about the pandemic. A really fantastic way to build connections between people. And we have virtual fika. Now, fika is a Swedish practice of having a coffee break or coffee and cake, but it's more than that. It's about making time to slow down and take a break, or I've seen it described as collective restoration, something that we all need right now. So again, an agendaless meeting, a casual get together, a chance for people to connect and just let conversation happen. Now, Lisette Sutherland, who's been working in the remote and distributed space for many years, has a blog post about virtual fika, and here's a few tips that she has. So, make sure you schedule a time, use videos so people can see each other, get creative and play games, and of course, bring coffee and cake along with you. There's also working the open. So this is kind of much harder to do when we're distributed, and it isn't, just look at my Jira board, because Jira boards mostly only make sense to the team whose Jira board it is. So there's a few things that we can do here. Some of these are synchronous and some of them are asynchronous. It's important to have both. So show and tells, I talked about earlier, teams, showing what they've been up to, showing what they've learned, sharing successes, helping to improve collaboration, and for stakeholders to get a chance to see what's happening. This is something that translates online fairly well, but even better than that, I think it's worth doing 2-minute video updates of what you've been up to, giving people the chance to watch something that's short. We've all been staring at screens for many hours, staring at videos for many hours, and sometimes it's good to have something short or something that someone can just dip into to take a break from work. Just this kind of ambient awareness of knowing what's going on, and if they see something interesting, they can jump in and ask more later. 2 things I'm going to just dig into a little bit here: week notes and P2. So the first one is week notes, which is almost like internal blogging, format for regular communication, and teams just again in sharing something in a digestible way and a written form of what they've been up to, so other teams across the organisation can see what's going on. This is again this asynchronous way of doing it, and there's a great blog post by Giles Turnbull that talks about different ways to do week notes. As well as that is P2. So there's an organisation called Automatic, who are the people who are behind WordPress, and they've been a distributed organisation for many, many years. Since they started, they've only ever been a distributed organisation. And they have a thing called P2, which is a internal blogging platform. And everything they do, everything they want to share, anything they want feedback on, goes on P2. They almost have a saying that if it's not on P2, it didn't happen. So again, that's asynchronous. It's information that goes out there that anyone can access, and they've now made the P2 available for anyone that wants to grab an internal blogging platform. It's available now from Automatic. We also have communities of practice. Now I could talk for hours about communities of practice, and I have. Communities of practice are bringing people together from across the organisation that have a shared concern or passion. And they look a little bit like this. They cut across different teams, different roles. They have lots of benefits, including broadening networks, learning, sharing knowledge and ideas, scaling practices, and greater collaboration. And they are fantastic for breaking down silos. And just an example here, here's a photo I took from a community of practice meetup with product managers. These are people that work in the same building that don't always have time to kind of get their head up and get out of what they're doing. And here they are meeting people for the first time that, even though they work in the same building, they had not met before, and immediately linking with each other and finding out where they have dependencies. Now, communities of practice work fantastically face-to-face, but they can also work fantastically remotely as well through synchronous methods like video calls and meetups, and showing each other what you're up to and having those kind of chats, and also asynchronously through forums, through instant messaging, through things like Slack, and through things like Teams, and always having those people that you can reach out to when you need help or bouncing ideas off each other. And so much more important when we can't get into the office and see each other. If you want to know more about communities of practice, here's my book. It's called Building Successful Communities of Practice, and there's lots of videos out there of me talking about it. So network organizations are smarter, happier, and more innovative, and we can create ways to make this happen. We can create opportunities. We can assist serendipity to happen by removing some of the barriers and thinking about more networked organizations and creating the opportunities for people to meet each other and building better habits now, or building great habits now for a better tomorrow. And we can think about it like this. Here is our silos, and here is our magic, serendipitous moments that can happen, where things can happen that you weren't expecting, by people being open to chance meetings and open to ideas from people from across organizations. Thank you.